Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Enhancing Customer Journeys Through Data and Analytics. So this is being recorded. I'll send an email with a link once it's ready. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat and we'll try to get to you as quickly as possible. Anish?
Yeah, hi, my name is Anish. So my background was helping to lead growth for companies, both full-time and as a consultant for about 11 years, and then started an executive recruiting firm specifically focused on senior level hires across growth, performance marketing, analytics, brand marketing. And so we've been lucky enough to work with quite a few popular startups that are scaling rapidly. Internally, we have about a team of 15 people, and I'm excited to be co-hosting this event and learning from the data masters here.
My intro now. My name is Ben Taylor. I'm the chief evangelist at an AI platform company called DataRobot. My background started in chemical engineering. I worked for Intel and Micron for 5 years in semiconductor applied. Then I went and joined the dark side, worked for a hedge fund as a quant, and I found myself working in HR at HireVue. So I was their chief data scientist, built out their data science team. I love HR. I think it was kind of an awkward relationship initially to kind of stumble into it and learn about some of the competencies, stuff like that. Did that for 4 years, and then I co-founded a deep learning AutoML company that was acquired by DataRobot last year. And now I work in marketing and love all of this stuff. So yeah, excited to be here today.
Hey everyone, I'm Sunny. I'm always a data person, so I enjoy being the bridge between data and people. Sorry, there's a siren on my street. Hope it's not that noisy for you. So I started my career in marketing, advertising consulting, and then go through game industry, e-commerce, and also fintech. Currently, I just recently joined a new team as the director of data and analytics for Maisonette. It's a kids product marketplace. Excited to be here and learn about all the data masters too.
Everyone, my name is HireVue. My background is in strategy and innovation consulting, specifically helping companies and clients launch new brands and products, both physically and digitally. Been with a number of different consultancies and spent the last 2.5, 3 years as the head of analytics at Realogy Holdings, the world's largest residential real estate company, and then as the head of analytics and data at Homer Learning, which was a Series B, now Series C venture-backed startup in the ed tech early childhood education space, working extensively with marketing and growth teams. And I recently joined Amazon Web Services as a principal consultant, focusing on AI, ML, and big data analytics. And really, I just work with customers and clients, really helping them think about how do you innovate with machine learning and AI? How do we make that translatable for you? And I tend to focus on working with marketing and product teams.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Nirav. So for everyone who's joining this event, when you RSVP'd, you put in a question that you wanted to get answered by the panelists, and we plucked out the most interesting of the questions, put them on this deck. And so that's what we're seeing right here. And this is a really interesting question because I think anyone who works in deep data, AI, machine learning has probably had to field this, probably, maybe a little bit less professionally, maybe more so when you're at a cocktail party and someone thinks that, Skynet might take over the world or something like that. But realistically, how do you leverage AI for good? And also in a way that users understand, what's happening with their data, and which is probably even two separate questions, really. So the first one, is there a great way to leverage AI for good? And I think Ben was actually giving some anecdotes about some areas that he worked in with one of his previous companies, where some of the good that they were doing maybe wasn't understood as well as it could have been understood by the press and or the general public. But if anyone wants to dig in here and dive in, maybe Ben can start, and then we can sort of ask around a little bit as well.
Yeah, I love this question because I kind of see that you can split it apart, but it also comes together because one of the things that we found with AI evolution is it's been very clumsy. And if you go back 6 or 10 years ago, like, oh my gosh, like, did anything get done that was useful? Because you have these really smart data scientists from STEM, and they come in with a lot of ego, and they're trying to kind of, they're trying to assert themselves as the SME on a certain process. And so since then, I've really given up on that. And I have so much respect for the SME or the subject matter experts. And a lot of times they don't have a college education. It's just a technician, it's an underwriter, it's someone who's worked that process for 10 or 20 years. And so transparency is key. Who's the transparency for? It's not for the data science team. It's for the customer. It's for the person you're actually servicing. And so there's something so good by allowing a human expert to be unlocked and out of a process. So think of an underwriter who's trapped in a process. Are they doing creative thinking? Are they being innovative? No, they're stuck in this mundane queue of work. They haven't evolved the process for 10 years. And we're to a point now where AI can come in and begin to evolve that process. So I'll stop there and throw it out to the rest of the group. AI for good, you can go down the AI ethics discussion, and that's a very long, useful discussion as well.
That's great. Actually, to dig in one, like you actually brought up an extra kind of angle there, where it's not necessarily AI for good, but AI, did it actually do anything, or was it just all in research papers in a very lengthy set of time of 6-ish years, where companies were raising money based off of the promise of AI and ML, but did it actually do anything?
And maybe to respond to that, I think early on, how is AI working? The data scientists would try to defend that it's working with AUC scores and statistical metrics. Is that really that convincing to an executive or a data, or like to the SME? And I love having the SME translate if it's working. So having the SME tell you if it's working, and if they tell you if it's working, it's being translated into KPIs and regular metrics that they were already consuming and talking about before you ever showed up. And so that translation is key. And sometimes it's problematic, it's hard. You've got two different teams working together. And so I think that's the beautiful scenario that we're starting to see more now, is the SME is finally signing off on if it's working. Because I've had so many awkward conversations before on, is the accuracy high enough? And it's kind of shoulder shrugs. Like, maybe.
That's fascinating, right? And like very simply to your underwriter example, like were you able to fill out your applications 5% faster because of this, or did you just have to go through more steps to train the AI and didn't get you anywhere? So that's super interesting. I think marketers face that as well, as where it's like, you did beautiful things, you made a beautiful brand, you made a beautiful kind of packaging set, you ran a lot of tests, but the amount of tests you run aren't something that a SME in this case might be the CEO or whoever is in charge of a P&L. So that's super interesting.
I love marketing. Makes me laugh.
Nirav or Sunny, any thoughts on that, and how to utilize a lot of the power that you hold with some of the newer technologies for potentially good, and also to help the people whose sort of data you're crunching.
I'll add to something Ben said. Do qualitative research. Seriously, right? Like, put the thing that you're building in front of people. Like, ideally, you're taking a design thinking approach to building your solutions, and you're building with empathy, but put it in front of somebody, because you can have the best intentions in the world, but until a human reacts to it and gives you feedback on it, like, you're not going to understand on the unintended consequences. You're not going to understand that fine line between cool and innovative and downright creepy. And that'll also help you make those decisions on, yes, we can do this, but should we do this, right? And I think like real folks will give you those answers. And I think too often data science teams don't really think about qualitative research or customer experience or factoring that in, because they're throwing a model over the fence.
Unintended consequences, that's the key term that you brought up. Most of the AI you see that is for harm or for bad, it was not intentional, it was accidental. So that term you said is so key to ensuring you have AI for good. Talk about it beforehand. Talk about the potential problems.
Yeah, I think piggyback to what Ben was mentioning about the AI ethic, I feel is definitely true. Like, when we browsing around the website for the recommendation, like no matter you on Meetup or on other website, why this is the selection recommend to us. There's always bias in the algorithm to show you the results as it is. And set that along, I feel the GDPR and CCPA, those kind of user privacy rule, just add extra layer of complexity onto the transparent to users. I feel in my day-to-day work, there's two areas I really see AI with great efficiency. One is the marketing, is the chatbot that really help a lot of automating a lot of conversation, direct people to solve the problem. The other one is customer care. We didn't build the algorithm internally, but we are using some third-party AI platform to reply email complaints, messages, and the accuracy is 95%. I think that's really a key point to Ben's points earlier. What is the right way to evaluate the efficiency of AI? I think it's ROI. What's the benefits bring by this AI strategy?
That's a great point. Cool, thanks for that. Grace, can we jump to the next one? Oh, this is really interesting, particularly for the performance marketers here. What's your ideal tech stack, kind of across everything? CDPs, for those that don't know, CDP is a customer data platform, analytics, cross-channel messaging. Yeah, what do you like to use? And are there situations where what you'd use at one company with a certain size of number of customers, employees, certain budgets that might have restrictions or opportunities versus another company? Yeah.
I'd say there's never going to be one size fits all, right? Where you are in the journey in a startup when you're first starting off, and the tools and solutions you're going to use are going to be different than as you get bigger, right? Practically speaking, there's solutions that are available in the marketplace, the Amplitudes of the world, that are really great when you're smaller, you want to be more cost efficient, right? And then as you get larger, the solutions, the way that they're built, the way that they're priced, the fact that you'll have more resources available for you will allow you to build and make that decision on when you do build versus buy. So there isn't one stack that I would recommend. Obviously, sitting at AWS, I'm going to purport and push AWS solutions. But the one thing I would definitely say is go in thoughtfully about build versus buy, where the benefits are going to be, and then specifically try to look past the hype on MarTech, right? There's not a single CDP solution in the world that solves everything that a CDP platform should do. And even the term CDP means a lot of different things. So if what you're looking for and saying is, I want to centralize and have a 360 view of my customer record, right? There's going to be platforms that do that well. If what you're saying is, I want a marketing orchestration solution that's going to connect to my DSPs and help me do media planning and buying and audience targeting, then that's what you're looking for. And you want to prioritize a CDP associated with that, or a CDP that's going to integrate well with the channels and tools that you're using that are going to do CRM, your email drip campaigns, your performance marketing kind of optimizations, right? So be very mindful, distrust anyone that says that they've got one answer fits all, and be very, very thoughtful on when you want to build and when you're going to buy, right? And as you get bigger and bigger, the build decision is increasingly going to be the right one when it comes to owning your data, because that's your real competitive advantage, right? How you use algorithms, how you apply it, how you work with other folks, how you do some of the personalization, like all of that you may be able to outsource out. But if you own the customer data, right, then that becomes your singular competitive advantage. And Ben was actually talking about it, how one of the companies you work with, they've got such a large data set now that is an inherent competitive advantage that anyone that's going to try to come to that marketplace is going to have to face, right? And that is the reality, right? So that's the one thing I would say, don't trade away.
Cool, thanks for that. I think Ben, you're about to say something.
Yeah, I think it's a little different than a CDP, but are you guys familiar with the company Pendo? They do a product platform to understand product behavior of your customers. I'll always plug them for the rest of my life because one of their co-founders invested in our startup. And so you like, here you go, do you need some more blood? Like, you know, thank you so much for allowing us to fly out of the nest the way we did. So I think one of the things I think about is all the data that matters. And that sounds like a silly throwaway line, but really I'm respecting the subject matter expert. Because I think sometimes with analytics, we're very narrow-minded that, oh, I've got a structured data set in front of me, and I've got some transaction data set here, and I've got customer reviews over here and unstructured. And we're kind of to the point now that it's all the data that matters, according to who, not the data science team, but the subject matter expert. And so we're seeing a lot more mixed models, or multi-modality, or some people like to call them fusion models, where you're pulling in all the data sources into a single decision point. And so that's something I would advocate for, regardless of the CDP you end up using. You should have that in mind. How do you get all that data into a central location, and how do you build predictive models that consume all of it all together in a single decision?
I'll add that there's not a single CDP in the market that will really let you do that, right? So you have to be really thoughtful on when you're saying all the data that matters, right? To Ben's point, it's spot on. At some point, you're going to realize that you're going to outgrow the CDP platforms that you have. And so then it really becomes a matter of how do you get there effectively, right? Or what trade-offs are you going to make because you can't bring everything in.
Yeah, I can share some experience I have on the CDP and analytics stack. I feel there's so many tools you can choose from. So some like a bigger company, bigger size company, I feel Salesforce and Adobe Analytics, they are the big solution. And they are so expensive too, but they works great. If you're setting apps correctly, you have the whole suite to fit all the needs you have. And exactly for smaller size company, I feel underlying CDP analytics and cross-channel messaging is identity resolution. You need to have your identity mapping so you know like exactly what user did what in which channel. And I feel there's so many tools to do it now, and it's actually a problem a lot of small companies try to solve. The popular technology stack, I saw several cases. I think one case is some company like to use Segment, integrate with Twilio or Braze for the messaging part. And there's also other company use mParticle with Amplitude as product analytics and to import the data back to the analytics. And I think to both Ben and Narav, sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. I think to your guys' point exactly, owning the data is so key, is you need to have a right data model layer, and that's go to your data stack. And if we talk about, best in practice data stack, in my personal favorites is Fivetran, Snowflakes, and DBT. But I'm biased because that's just my personal favorite.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. So, and maybe even digging into the question, because some of the people here on this call are working at earlier stage startups, or maybe even building their own startup. Like, let's say it's a direct to consumer startup that might be selling, consumer goods, something physical, and they're just getting up and running, right? And more or less, most of these companies get up and running with Shopify, get their basic e-com up, to get their basic merch up, plug in maybe some Google Analytics. But, what would you say to a founder or, a performance or growth person, number one, at one of these companies? Like, all right, this is maybe like the first 1, 2, or 3 kind of things that you should look at to start implementing to help you do your job when you're just getting it going.
Start thinking through how you're architecting to collect user information, eventually first party, right? Particularly with the changes with iOS 14.5 and losing IDFA, as privacy regulations become more and more persistent, right? How you stitch an identity is going to be very, very hard. And you're going to need a combination of deterministic and probabilistic approaches to really be cutting edge. So think through how you do that and be strategic. And I think that's places where someone like a Shopify can be a great partner, particularly if you've got a digital plus physical location, right? They've got solutions for you both that actually do help you. For those of folks who've seen it, right? Shopify has got that in-person store scanner that I can purchase. And so if you do that purchase in store and you get that information, and then you do a purchase on the website, it's actually easier for you to connect that identity and the user information, right? So those are the types of things where understanding your entire customer journey, right, and how you're going to be able to connect the dots early on, even if some of that's a little bit forced, right, will help you, because it'll prevent it from being in a position where you're 6, 12, 18 months down the line and you've got these massive black holes in your data that you're then trying to work around, or you're regretting a solution choice you made because you're like, Shopify was really expensive. And then you realize, well, the value of having that connected experience, it supersedes, the marginal cost differential between them and their competitors.
Makes a lot of sense. So in essence, Shopify itself would be able to be a little bit of a database there where you can have your first party data and almost be enough for you if you're, let's say, have less than 1,000 customers.
Yes, it's super cool experience for anyone who's in the Brooklyn area. Boisson in Brooklyn does non-alcoholic drinks. They've got Shopify physically in the store. And if you do the in-person store experience and the web experience, I urge you all to look at it. Super, super cool on how they've combined that. And I think it's just really interesting on what Shopify is like offered to really solve some of these problems for startups and helping them think through it earlier in their journey.
Okay. And do you feel like, let's say again, the example of someone with less than 1,000 customers at that point, do you feel like it's necessary to add on another CDP or another analytics layer, or that's just kind of overkill when you're sort of early and maybe, I don't know, I could see it go either way, like one way being kind of like, you kind of don't have that much to slice and dice in the first place. And so you can kind of eyeball a lot of the basic dashboarding, or on the other end, like maybe you do want a foundational layer and get all the extra plugins and apps that you get from a CDP.
Right. I mean, it's consulting answer, right? It depends, right? But I think in the sense that you're retail and direct to consumer, right, the Shopifys of the world are kind of solving a lot of that problem and mitigating it. If you're more mobile centric or mobile oriented, I think you're probably in a position where you're going to need a CDP or some type of solution, right? The segments and particles of the world, right? Just because you won't have a large development team, and what they're accelerating for you is, the ability to put a product out into the market sooner, right? So I really think about and focusing on what gets you to get the product into the market sooner, right? And then focus on the analytics pieces a bit later, because again, until you get something in the hands of customers, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you're not going to have any data to begin with.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely see some companies getting really advanced really early, and it's like, wow, you're spending more on that than the revenue you're getting from your users. So, and then the opposite of like, let's say someone just hit 1 million users, like what are some analytics layers? And then also you're probably, getting into some issues of attribution, because, you may have some radio ads running, you may have some TV ads, you may have your normal paid social and, paid search. So like, any things that you've seen that add value for cross-channel and sort of analytics and dashboarding and all of that.
I thought attribution wasn't needed in marketing. We just shoot from the hip, right?
That's true. It's all about honesty.
I love the comparing like different marketing groups, where I've worked on marketing groups where it's like, well, how much did you spend on this conference? Big number. Did it provide value? Oh yeah, we had all these attendees. But like, I'm super impressed with our current marketing leadership team at DataRobot. Like the attribution feels like sales, feels like you work in a sales org, but it's in a marketing org, where attribution is analyzed all the way down to almost everything you do, which is fun because you get into some weird gray areas like brand equity. How do you measure brand equity? How do you define that? How do you measure win on it? The other thought I have earlier is, I think new founders are optimists. Seasoned founders are a little bit more pessimistic, where they admit they don't know. So their product vision is wrong. And new founders, they rarely want to admit that. But seasoned founders, they know their product vision is wrong. And that's why they want the customer feedback as soon as possible. They want, but I take that a step further and say, I don't want customer feedback through like a focus group or a survey. I actually want to measure behavior, because I don't trust the customer's opinion. Because you can bring them through like a workshop where they're doing like a recipe tutorial. They like it, they're giving you a thumbs up. But if that behavior is not shown on new problems in new settings, do you get what I'm trying to say? Like there's sometimes with some of these platforms, we do what I think of is recipe coaching. It's like, hey, here's 2 or 3 examples. Can you guys repeat the examples? Yes, we can. And then they go off and they don't actually solve a real problem on their own. And so I like to think about what's the customer behavior that matters to you? And so, so I think that's really interesting to kind of talk about the product. Sometimes it's very different than you might assume. Like with Yelp, it's not the time to find a restaurant, it's the quality of the restaurant they find. Like things like that are counterintuitive.
That's super interesting. And like people have very strong opinions on both sides of the spectrum about qualitative research and interviewing your potential prospective customers. Obviously, like Steve Jobs famously just didn't believe in it at all. And then I listened to a recent podcast with Keith Rabois, where he basically said, an example you might want to look at is, ask someone directly why they bought a Porsche. and you'll get all kinds of bullshit answers like, oh, the engine and the horsepower. It's like, no, because they want to look cool driving a Porsche, but they won't be honest about the reason that they actually bought a Porsche. So people also have their unique things that they're afraid to be honest about. So that's fascinating.
They won't admit they have daddy issues.
all of those things. Yeah. Let's jump to the next one, Grace. How would you? Oh, this is really interesting. So how would you describe best practices for customer segmentation? Probably like, taking it all the way from an early company and how they should think about it through to like a company that has, let's say 1 million users.
So customer segmentation, I think about not just segmenting the customers you've acquired, but also trying to decide what are the new personas you want to go after. Because I think as a product evolves, you add new personas and new customer segments that you haven't gone into yet. I don't know if that's what those question's hitting at, but that's where my mind is at now. What are the new segments you haven't gone into that you want to?
Yeah, I think that's great. And from my own personal experiences, I'd say one thing to really think about with this is, in particular, is that it's very easy to get way too advanced too early. And because, each optimization I think you do within customer segmentation provides, say, an X% of lift that you might get in terms of engagement, in terms of better ROAS, in terms of retention rate. But when you're talking about a very small sample size, you have to really take into account the effort that takes to get a certain amount of customer segmentation. So if you're putting in weeks worth of work, multiple weeks worth of work, really, going deep on your customer personas and segmenting groups out based on LTV, based on historical purchases, based on, oh, hey, this is a group of people that purchases this particular type of thing with regularity. Therefore, we're going to send them specific emails based on the regularity of their previous purchases. You might be looking at a 1 to 2 to 3% lift. And I think you have to look at the revenue that comes from that 1 to 2 to 3% lift. If it's $5,000, was that really worth 2 weeks of effort to like really segment, send very specific emails, very specific ads? So that's something I just see some people getting, especially people who come from very big companies. And, I came from some organizations, I wouldn't call them big, but like we had very, very well developed customer segmentation models that were able to send very specific messages to very specific people. But these were companies making over $100 million. So a 1% lift on that audience is very large. And then I see some people taking those methodologies and bringing it to companies that are still kind of figuring out their DNA, maybe make $1 million a year, and are spinning their wheels to bring a lot of those bigger company models to smaller companies, and it just doesn't have the same oomph, because the top line revenue isn't going to go up as much. So much of what Ben said, it should be a ladder. You get more and more advanced when the time is right, but you don't need to get incredibly advanced at the very beginning. Just get stuff out the door and learn.
I would also be skeptical of your product market fit and who you think your audience is as you get bigger and look for more growth targets, right? It's very easy to start and say, I know my audience, it's Susie, and I create this creative persona and I focus in on them, and that's the audience. But as you're looking to grow and really understand the addressable opportunity market, the biggest mistake I see folks running into is they have this preconceived notion on who the consumer is. Either it's like, well, men won't buy my product or whatever, right? Or dads don't do purchase decisions for educational products, whatever that ends up becoming, right? You need to rigorously challenge those assumptions and those biases and test against segments who you may not expect to be your consumer audience, or look really deep at the data to see where that's qualitative or quantitative to get that. I'll give a good example on this. Years ago, we were working with a sports drink manufacturer that does ready-to-drink protein beverages, right? And they kept putting carbs in their protein products. And as we were doing a new branding campaign, a new product innovation campaign, we sat there and said, like, when you look at the data, The people who are buying your products are buying keto and Atkins products. These are all carbophobes. Like, why do you keep adding carbs in your product, right? And like, why are you only selling to women? Because clearly there's a lot of men that want that. And the minute they did that, right, they got 30-40% sales uplift because they just were, self-constraining and self-restricting their audience. And this is an isolated example. I'd say half the marketing teams I run into face that problem because they just come in with this biased view of who their customer is. And as they get bigger, they just don't look beyond it.
That's an amazing point. And like, part of the reason some of these, not all, but some of these companies have these incredibly biased views and personas is because they paid Ogilvy or they paid Edelman like $500,000 to do like a persona research, like, oh, here's Susie the homemaker, here's Davey the dad, here's like Mandy the outdoorsy person, and here's your user personas, and thanks for the $500,000, which like, that's not very hard to do. Anybody can make these like personas, and the agencies would love to take your money to do that for you. But like, you really have to be thoughtful to understand, like they're not going to validate the whether these personas actually make sense or what you can even do with them in a practical sense. So I've just seen those like, and I think it comes back to some level of planning, and like, sometimes planning isn't the right answer. You just have to throw things at the wall, see how people react, and then come back. But you bring up a really good point, because in like digitally, it's very easy to do that because you can just iterate rapidly. But I guess when you're doing retail, it's a lot less easy because you kind of get fewer shots, right? You can't just go and do all this huge packaging, put it in front of retail, and then pull it back 3 months later and be like, oh, hey, we forgot to pull out the carbs. So I can understand retail kind of makes a situation where you do need to do some of that planning, and the planning kind of is in the dark without as much. But if there's a way to test on your user personas and get or to test on real customers and get that feedback loop from people who've really tried your product and can complain about the things that they don't like about your product, or can give you feedback on why they didn't buy your product, it's so much more valuable than just like coming up with these fun, creative personas.
I'll also say this: if you're doing insights related work, and I tend to find value there, right? I would push the agency or the research partner, the insight partner you're working with, to give you a plan on how you're going to recreate those segments, right, into your big data platform, because it's eminently doable. It's much more common now. Like, you should have that plan in place, right? Because part of that will be recreating the segments themselves and the algorithms around that. Part of that, to a point that Ben made earlier, is you're going to have to collect new data, right, and understand those behaviors and track those behaviors, right, in your apps, your products, your sites, right? So get them to say what their recommendation is, and then it's going to become an ongoing process for how you evolve your offerings, how you evolve and think about your data to collect those signals.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And just going back to that really quick, I think, yeah, just my overall thoughts are, you need to look at your data first and then, make these segments, not vice versa. And that's kind of where I've seen some value. This is a long question. So now that I guess just to summarize, like, now that third-party cookies are less able to be utilized based on recent changes, what's next? Are you trying to implement some other types of software to fill in some gaps, or just live in having a little bit less of the visibility that we used to have, and just make decisions with what you have? And then how are you planning for that? Because obviously everyone's been trying to figure out what to do over the last few months. So would love to hear thoughts on how people are kind of approaching that.
Well, maybe I'm off on this one, but I was chuckling at reading this, because I was thinking, if you disable cookies because of advanced analytics and because all the data that's attached to you and your phone, it wouldn't be outside the the realms of possibilities to still track you, like based on your fingerprint, because the user agent can give you so much, but if I know the motion, like the mouse clicks or how your fingers interact with the site, it wouldn't be that hard to build something to say, oh, you've been here before, and have an agency get stood up that actually begins to kind of track fingerprints out there. So I think it's really hard to truly disappear online. even by disabling something like that.
Well, that's creepy and wonderful.
Yeah.
Depending
I mean,
on where you are on the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge isn't going to be just taking away cookies, right? It's the new privacy regulations like CPRA, right? The law that's going through in Florida where you may have to delete all the marketing data in every 2 years, right? Which is building a solution that's going to look ahead of corners and be resilient to some of those privacy changes is really what you got to think about. And the way I approach it, and first of all, one tactic is go talk to Amazon. We got lots of folks who specialize in this area, so that's a short plug. I'm happy to introduce folks to them. But the way we think about it is two common trends that'll come through. There's going to be greater and greater value exchanges where the opt-in to get you to share your data, right, is going to be tied to something of tangible value, right? Be it the experience, be monetary, wherever. So you'll see more and more of these value exchanges cropping up and providing as that intermediary. The second is this concept of a clean room, which is an intermediary location where I can connect and join the data and be privacy compliant, right? Because even with fingerprinting data, as Ben has mentioned, right, I can collect fingerprinting data on first-party platforms that I have, but I can't necessarily join or connect that on iOS using a third party. I could potentially do that on iOS or Android if it's sitting first party within my cloud platform, but increasingly sending that data out into the broader ecosystem is going to be less and less permissible and more likely to get you thrown off one of the app stores. So think about a first party strategy, think about ways that you will do fingerprinting yourself, right? Or providers let you do it on your platform, and then ways that you will get people to opt in, and two, how you're going to exchange that data with third parties in a privacy compliant manner. And those options will become restricted. But the idea of a data clean room, right, is what more and more agencies like Trade Desk is doing it now, right, where that's how you'll end up sharing and linking out your data and doing analytics, right? So just get prepared for that. Be ready for those types of restrictions to come into place.
Cool. Sunny, I know you're probably dealing with that right now with since you are kind of helping lead on analytics for direct to consumer brand. How are you thinking about some of how has your planning processes been over the last 3 to 6 months?
That's a great question. And I feel exactly to a lot of points previously is owning your first party data is really crucial here. Like how you can mapping up internally and owning your data and using that to empower business decision across the pillar. And I think exactly to Nivar's points is how you have a structure, like data wise, you are ready to delete all the customer data whenever there's a request coming, how you can be more flexible around those private issue, and make sure whenever you choose new tool, make sure the new tool you integrate, they are privacy compliance too. So that can help you save a lot of efforts as well. That's generally my best practice and how I think about this problem.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And there's a lot of talk about first party data. So like, how do you define first party data versus not first party data? Like, what does that entail and how does that differ on a day-to-day basis?
I think it's going to be increasingly within your own properties, right? As the primary touch point, right? And then everything else will be how you interact and connect into that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Yeah,
no, that's all. Any additional thoughts there, Sunny? Yeah.
Just one quick thought. I think the
Please.
way I think about first party data is how you build your brand and loyalty for your customer to have a 360 view of your customer profile, that and keep expanding that program. That's how I think about owning the first party data internally.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And the opposite of that would be you just have holes in your customer data because you're I don't know, using a third party tool that doesn't have the same insights, or how does that sort of manifest itself?
That's a great question. I think it depends on what tool you choose to integrate and what problem you try to solve. I think the way I think about the problem is I always start with the data internally and to think about it's exactly the question. You want to build something or buying something. And I feel it's always start with the data, what you have, and prioritize what's the problem you try to solve, because there's many data and data will never be perfect, but it depends on what data you need to solve what problem. I feel it's essentially key for a small business, like for startup, you couldn't gather all the data, but depends on what you try to build, what do you try to distinguish your product with rest on the market. I feel for bigger company, the strategy will definitely be different.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that. Trying to parse out the most interesting portion of this question. Is there anything just cheap or free or open source that you've used? Be like, oh yeah, that's actually pretty cool. I've gotten some good stuff from that in terms of visibility into data, or it's turned into making a successful e-com marketing product program.
So the biggest challenge when you're doing journeys, right? Besides defining what the customer journey is and which journeys are important, right, is connecting the data, right? More often than not, the challenge that you're going to run into is not, do I have a hole or do I not have a specific set of data? It's that I'll get the data, but I can't connect it in. So I don't get that holistic view. And so connecting that data becomes important, and that becomes a channel to do journey analytics on whichever part of the journey that you're looking at. So for folks that are interested, increasingly, you'll see folks talking about graph networks, and you've kind of seen those cool Facebook network graphs, right? Graph networks is a way of stitching that data together to do types of journey analytics to get to customer 360. So that's going to be kind of the trending route, I would imagine, over the next decade, to increasingly use graph analytics to pull this together. And so if you're looking at open source tools around graph analytics, Neo4j's got an open option. There's a number of those libraries available in R and Python. The challenge you're going to run into is that in order to use those open source tools, you're going to have to know how to code or program or lean on someone that has that experience.
Makes sense.
I was smiling about the cheapest mention because I think best and cheap, they're not one and the same. And I've heard this sob story over and over again where I'll interact with different executives and it's time for them to start their analytics strategy, and they go look at the price of like a principal level data scientist, and the sticker shock on that salary scares them, so they hire the new kid out of school. And that was the cheapest solution. And then 9 to 10 months from now, they're sending me a text asking, do I need to fire my data scientist? It's like, well, someone has to pay the tuition, and the principal data scientist that you would have hired, someone else paid that tuition. Like they, 3 to 5 years experience, they got things in production, they made mistakes. You could have paid for that, but instead you decided to pay for this. So that was the cheapest solution. But if you actually normalize that by things that were done, it ended up being the most expensive. So the best solution is something that gets you promoted. The best solution is whatever helps the business. And so I'm a big fan of finding platform companies. Obviously I work at DataRobot, but find a handful of platform companies and find ones that are willing to do a white glove service for free for 30 days, hoping to land you as a customer, because that's the cheapest solution. It was free. So if you have a problem worth solving, have a few of them come and compete on that problem. And if they can't find value, then maybe you need to wait. Maybe there's some data prep. There's some other data engineering practices that have to be done. But I think this is so funny because it catches so many companies off guard because they don't want to pay a lot of money for an experienced data science hire. So they hire the new kids out of school. I'm curious have you guys seen that in the market where it's like, oh, we hired someone, don't worry, they've got a PhD from this school, 0 applied experience. And I just know how that story typically ends.
Yeah, I mean, we get called a lot to replace that person, but yeah. And then sometimes a really experienced person is actually bad because they're too experienced and they're like so far away from any of the day-to-day, and they're so far away from wanting to do any of the day-to-day that it ends up being the poor hire. So yeah, we actually did a whole other session on like who to hire when, and like much to the customer segmentation question, it's a consistent kind of stairs. Like it's not about hiring the best person, it's the best person for the stage. And I think with tools like this, it is also who's giving you 30 days of free services? Like if someone came to us asking for that, I'd be like, are you kidding me? No. That's awesome.
It'll be funny if I get my hand slapped for this, but I'm pretty sure if the opportunity is right, obviously there's some screening. So if you're a young startup and if they don't see value, or if you're not the right size of company, then that's not available because that's a limited resource. But for the right opportunities, that's what I'm seeing right now. Like the POCs are free and their timescales are shrunk down to 30 days. Like that's the hope. Because if you don't have a problem that can be pushed to value in that time frame, then your data is not together. Your data is like, you have some other issues that have to be addressed. One of the biggest issues with AI is answering the question, do you have a problem worth solving? Because their AI is the shiny new toy. A lot of people have it and they try to find a place to put it rather than going the reverse, having a problem worth solving and backing into the appropriate solution. So I've become a big fan that sometimes the appropriate solution is not AI. It's like simple heuristics, it's human in the loop, or it's the most basic model you've ever heard of, like some Bayesian method or logistic regression, but that's not going to make the PhD student happy coming off of their PhD. Like that's not going to be that intellectual scratch that they need, because they want to do something that's complicated, that's interesting, that challenges them. But yeah, a Bayesian model in production that can give you 70% of the value, 80% of the value, or before you had zero, before you were stuck.
Okay, awesome. And actually, I think Nirav and I had a long chat about this previously in a previous session of, I think a lot of people, and it kind of dovetails on what you were just talking about, like what is the difference between sort of analytics and data science? I think some of the business driving stuff might fall under the analytics bucket, where if you just cut your data in a good way, you could get some insights and then roll that out into actual programs. But how would all three of you sort of define the difference between data science and analytics? How do you think about that?
I mean, I think the line is going to get blurred as we move forward. I think the important part for people to realize is a point that Ben and Sunny have made, right? And I'll give a number around this. 90% of data science projects do not make it into the business, do not get operationalized. That is a terrible statistic, right? It's a scary statistic, right? And so I think what that really, really means is you need to emphasize working backwards from the problem itself, right? And then taking that and saying, what's the problem? How am I solving it? And what's the right way to solve that problem, right? And then get to the right way to solve that problem as quickly as possible. Every single data science model that you're going to build is going to get iterated. They'll get to different levels of complexity as you need to drive bigger business value. But you can start small and start simple and get to something in a matter of weeks, right? That then gets operationalized in the business, that gets in front of consumers, that you experiment, the A/B test on, right? I think that's critical. I think that mindset, right, is typically the mindset that you would have seen in business analysts, in the analytical community, right? Data scientists need to adopt more and more of that. They need to start taking that domain-centric approach rather than coming in and saying, I'm going to make a neural net out of everything, because that's the quickest way to lead to projects that don't result in ROI.
That's super interesting. And do both of you, Sunny and Ben, agree with what he said with 90% of data science projects not seeing kind of the light of day, or is Nirav just really biased by terrible experiences?
No, I completely agree. 90% they're not consumed by a business unit, but they're also not always seen as failures. Like a big number of that, they are failures. They're unfortunate. They could have been prevented, but some of that is learning. You will build a model on a process and you realize some things and not ship that model, or maybe productionize it, but you learn something. But I don't want that to sound optimistic. Like it's I am definitely on the pessimist side. But I just wanted to call out that there is a sliver there where even if you didn't get something into production, it's not a complete waste. You can get some insight.
That's awesome. And had you had similar experiences, Sunny?
I would say like it's an interesting question. So on my team, I do have both analysts and data scientists. To answer the previous question, I think there are several reasons why a lot of high percentage of the data science model didn't get to production. I think the typical three questions, reasons I saw is, One is the scope of the project. Things are not aligned and the delivery is broken apart. And the second part is whether there's a data ops structure to really enable you product your model efficient and in a cheapest way, because it can end with really high cost and really not that feasible to reiterate on your model. The third one, I have a third one on my mind before, and now I kind of forget about it. I will bring back if I remember that. And the way I distinguish data scientists and data analysts on my team, I feel it's an interesting way how I distinguish. I just think about data scientists is like all day you do is modeling. Like you try to drive your initiative by really advanced modeling projects, but it doesn't necessarily mean like a data analyst, you don't do modeling. Still, one domain of analysts is you need to be really familiarized with business application modeling, and you be able to, from descriptive analysis to explorative analysis, and to be predictive and prescriptive. That's still key for data analysts too. But I would think data scientist is all you do is you try to drive in like impact from your data science project, from your model. That's how I distinguish two roles on my team.
I had a quick thought I want to throw out there to the group. I think as data science evolves, we are moving into a new class of accountability when it comes to things that are in production. And so I feel like building a model is, 10 to 20% of the value. But once that model is built, how do you productionize it? Like Sunny said, like how do you get that handed off? How do you get that consumed? But more importantly, how are you going to handle feature drift in 3 weeks? How are you going to handle a feature excursion? How are you going to handle continuous model deployments? Like there's a whole thing of productionized AI that comes that a lot of data scientists they're not familiar with. They're not experienced with that. They haven't made those mistakes in the wild. And then the other thing I like to think about is model consequence, because I think sometimes we think of model consequence as being like, let's make fun of marketing for a second. Like, oh, it's like a lead model. It's like, is it more or less accurate? Like, hopefully it's more accurate. But some models have severe consequences. Some models can cost a lot of money if things go wrong. People can get fired if the model behaves badly. But some models we actually see with COVID, they will kill people. They will send hospital supplies to the wrong hospital. They'll do other things. And so I think as we go into a more trusted space, you're dealing with that level of accountability. And so can you build a productionized model where human lives are on the line and go to the beach on the weekend? And I think for data scientists that are hand coding stuff, the answer is no. Like, can you actually enjoy the beach on Sunday, knowing that this model is being consumed and making life and death decisions at the hospital? Like,
so then what?
well, you need just the interesting thing is humans have been here before. Like you look at manufacturing, you look at like how we handle like nuclear power plants. People go on vacation at nuclear power plants. Like they have shifts and different things. So a big part of that is experience capture and monitoring. So having things in place that can escalate. So let's use the example of a decision at a hospital. There is a life and death decision in this predictive model. Depending on the confidence level, it might kick in. Maybe some of these models are such high consequence that it needs a human review. A cardiothoracic surgeon has to review the model's decision every single time they're going to delay a surgery. But you can also imagine something where maybe not all the time, maybe it's like some type of augmented intelligence. Sometimes it's brought in front of the human expert, other times it's not. As we go up the AI maturity curve, we're starting to enter this trusted space where we see more applications of life and death decisions with AI. But 10 years ago, like, no way. That would be insane to think that my AUC is high. Don't worry, run with it.
I also think like having a product-centric approach to building your solutions will help a lot of these data science teams, right? Like you've got to start thinking through the data science job isn't just pushing the model, right? It's getting it into production, to Ben's point, right? And it's also, A/B testing it, right? And having that monitoring in, right? Like think about like a personalization model that you put into market on your website. If all of a sudden, your funnel rates drop to 2% or 0%, right? Or you're losing 98% of your sales leads to your funnel, right? You want to A/B test that. B, I want alerts and mechanisms out there so that when I'm doing these tests, a signal's coming out to me so that not that I don't experiment, but that if something goes wrong with the experiment, like I'm notified of it really early, right? And that's just a mental shift that data scientists in the industry needs to start taking on. And some of that will be on the data science side. Some of that will be augmenting those folks with designers and product owners to help them think through that.
Yeah, and some of that stuff you can't anticipate. At HireVue, we had a feature drift excursion in the wild. A customer complained, and the impact came from a vendor. A vendor changed the threshold, did not notify us. It eventually made it into production, and we were caught by the customer, and we were able to fix it quickly. But like, you have scenarios you can't anticipate all of these things, so you need really good monitoring tools to catch things in the wild.
That's actually a great point. How important monitoring tools are. And do you have a favorite monitoring tool?
So DataRobot, we have an MLOps product that we bought a company called Parallel MLOps is kind of the bigger category. So if people that are listening, they can go just research MLOps and they can find other competing and open source opportunities out there. But there's some classical gotcha moments like feature drift, stuff like that, continuous model deployments, stuff honestly that engineering was more familiar with, at least at a high level. Like, you step outside data science into engineering and manufacturing, and this stuff was already talked about. But for data science, it's kind of, they've been given the luxury of smart experimental geniuses, and finally they've kind of had to go into the correct swimming lanes more and more.
Okay, awesome. So we're at time today. I'd love to thank our three panelists, Nirav, Ben, and Sunny.